Welcome back. Today we're going to discuss in our daily lesson a little bit of more of recording, adding in the recording of this project we're working on as a group in Soundtrap for the song Ink is Dry. So at this point we've already started off by writing some lyrics, making a melody, having some basic chord progressions, and adding in a little bit more. And so now it's my turn to add some guitar. And step one is listening, and listening a lot to what I hear, and then trying to figure out how I could add to the mix and make it appropriate for what we're doing. So let's start off by getting the program up, and here we have it. As you can see right now, I've actually already recorded these guitar tracks, but let's pretend I didn't. And to do that, I'm going to mute them. I'm just going to mute them because I'm just trying to get an idea. I'm also going to turn on the loop feature right now, and I'm going to loop just those first four measures. I know the chord progression. It's basically C, E minor, G, C, E minor, C, and back to G. So let's check it out. So once again, got the G chord, got it ready, here we go. E minor, C, back to G. And when Spencer did it, they did these chords that held on two fingers there, a little more color. So that's one thing that can work, is just playing the chords with different rhythm patterns. But I want to think more about style. Let's look at some styles and see if we think they work. Like maybe reggae. Yeah, I didn't like that at all. Didn't seem to fit in my estimation. Maybe we check out, how about some country? I don't know, that's probably a little too up-tempo and peppy for the song. I'll go back to my roots. Maybe we'll do some Van Halen style riffs. I'm not sure if they were thinking about metal, or maybe they were thinking about something a little bit heavier. Maybe some of those power chords we like using. I have a feeling that's probably not what they're looking for either. I think I figured some things that didn't work. I think one of the things I am noticing, overall, it's just kind of like this mellow, ethereal sound. So I want to add to that, and here's the process I went through to do that.
3:28 a.m.
Okay, let's dive a little bit into the way I decided to put together this chord progression. So this is going to be a little theory, and some of it might go deep, but the gist of it is basically anything that you don't get, there's lots of opportunities to learn it. And when I was a younger player, especially in my teens, and I was working on adding guitar parts, a lot of the time I would literally just sit there and mess around until I found what worked well. So the first thing you need to know is that most of our chords are built on separate notes, the triad being the most important thing that happens very regularly in music. So in this case, we're talking about a G chord, and the notes in the G chord are G, B, and D. If you don't know the names of the notes in your chords, that's totally fine. A lot of guitar players go their whole life without having any idea what any of the notes they're playing are. They just know shapes, they know tabs, and that's fine. But for us, we're going to talk about a little bit of theory here. So this G chord has a G, a B, and a D. Now on a keyboard, that's pretty easy. I can play those three notes very clearly. On a guitar, it's rarely that easy because the first G chord you probably learned looked like this. Right? And if it did, I got news for you. You've now learned a G chord that has a lot of notes in it. It's got a G, a B, a D, another G, another D, and another G. So there's 3 G's, 2 D's, and 1 B. And I could play that G chord lots of ways. I could play it like this. Now I've got an extra B in it. You can learn the bar chord. And that's this one right here, right? That's the second chord you're looking at. So, but I can make it just a triad by just playing these 3 notes, G, B, and D. You'll notice that's the middle of that power chord. I'm sorry, the bar chord. Or I could play the top 3 notes and just have those 3. In that case, G is no longer my lowest note. That's what we call an inversion, when I'm no longer having the note the chord's named after being the lowest note. More on that later. I can take that and I can move it up here, for instance. It's the same exact 3 notes, but it has a little bit of a different sound because of where it is on the neck. And you could do this all over. We could probably find easily 50 chords that are G chords. So a ton of options for learning how to play these all over. Determining which one you want, well, I started here, that basic triad. Let's see what happens next. So now we're looking at the progression itself. At the outset, it's just a G, E minor, C, back to G. I added in somewhat color notes, some notes to make it sound a little bit more colorful. So I'm laying out what the notes of each of those chords are up here on the left or right. I don't know, I can't tell. But basically I'm saying a G is a G, B, and a D. Now that E minor chord is now an E minor 7, which means I've basically added one more note to it. A specific note, in this case the 7th, but that's more theory than we need. So you see there's an E, a G, a B, and a D in it right now. Well, it still has that G, B, and D, and I'll probably have a bass player playing along and they'll play that E. So I can just do this again. But if I wanted to, I can add an extra E on top to get that sound. Then we get to this confusing one. I could have just used a C chord here, but I really started messing with the notes and deciding which one sounded the best. And I came up with this, which is what we'd call a C6 sus2. Very confusing. But basically, if I had that C in the bass there, it's got a really nice sonority. And I'm assuming the piano is going to have a C there, or the bass. And then finally I ended up with this G6, which is, remember earlier how we had the E minor 7? It's the exact same chord. It's just a different way to call it based on what's in the bass. Sounds different then. So then I just had to decide how I was going to make it sound in the mix. And since we have this kind of ethereal sound right now the way it is, I decided to have like a slow arpeggio. So in reality, there's only one note I'm changing throughout, which is kind of fun. You know, it more or less means that there's not a lot changing, but with everybody else doing their bit, it's going to sound really cool together. And you can check that out later on in the recording. So now we'll go to the next one, which is this kind of chorus part. And then the chorus starts off with the C, D, and E minor. And in this case, I decided, first of all, I'm going to play it with my hands, but I decided to just play those actual chords like bar chords way up here on the neck. But instead of making it super thick sounding, now originally I really wanted to syncopate it to give it a little bit more sound pushed forward, but unfortunately it didn't jive with the rest of the band and what they were doing at this point. So later on when we discuss it, I'm going to bring that up to them and say, hey guys, why don't we push that beat ahead a little bit to get some forward motion. You'll notice I'm using my thumb and then these two fingers just to pluck it. But it's in reality, I'm just not holding the whole chord because I don't need it. Then came what I thought was probably the most fun part, and that is this section. So there's a whole lot of chords going on all of a sudden. Then that felt like a lot was going on there. I decided to go way simpler on the guitar part, but simpler in a way that still had that forward motion by having constant eighth notes going. So I'm doing that with this arpeggiation. I could do that with my pick, but in this case I'm using my fingers. Unfortunately, you can't see the music and my hand at the same time there. But just like before, I looked at what the chords were and I spent a lot of time kind of messing around with it. So I said, oh, well, the C chord is C, E, and G, right? And then an A minor also has those notes. So I'm going to leave the A out, assuming that whoever I'm playing with will cover that. And then comes the one that doesn't have anything in common, that B chord with its sharps in there. Oh boy. So I decided instead, I noticed it's the same chord, just down a half step. And then I have that E minor chord. And that E minor chord doesn't have that C, but it still has an E and a G in it. So if you look at the tab that I wrote out there, basically, I'm only using 2 of those notes. And you'll notice 3 of the 4 notes, the way they're grouped, is actually an E. It's just 2 different E's. One of them a little bit out of tune. Which is a kind of cool sound. Depending on what the bass is, it's going to change the way it feels. So with a C under it, that's very different than with an A under it. And then later on with an E under it. This is one of my favorite things to do when I'm experimenting with guitar sounds, is to take 2 or 3 notes and just keep changing the bass to get different sounds. You'll hear it all sounds a little bit different. Now, in this case, all I had to do for the B chord is actually move my fingers back 1 fret. And the cool thing is now with that open E, you're going to get a little bit of crunch, and I love the crunch. And then I figured I'd finish up with this. So then I put it into the song, and you can see how it goes right here. Let's try playing through it.
12 seconds later.
I've already recorded them, as I mentioned earlier, and you'll notice that when I did record them, I record them in separate kind of sections, one for the verse, one for the chorus, and then I actually added a strumming section afterwards. I highly recommend that you do that. So now what you want to do is add a track, and once you've added the track, probably name it something that you're not going to forget. So let's go through and let's just do the adding. I'm going to take off the loop feature now because I'm just going to listen through it. And because I'm listening, not recording, I'm just going to have to jump in right afterwards. I'm not going to make the first beat. So here's what it sounds like a little bit.
Grown into my new perspective, grown into skin that feels like mine. I'm here with my dear new collective, been figuring out a day at a time. You seem together at 17, so I felt broken in my age. I know my parents will miss me, but the sound check's over, and it's time to go on stage. The ink is dry now, it's time to turn the page. The hand they gave you is cheap.
So there you have it. Let's see what the game thinks.